Two lawsuits.
Yeah.
I'd like to know some highlights of your relationship with Dickie Scruggs. When did that begin?
The first time, pretty obvious. I said it a couple of times here already at he crashed a meeting with Don Barrett. Second time, over a period of the same month, a little bit after it's the April of 1994. We're creeping into 94, and there's no way you're looking at this. You have to think of two cities, two lawsuits, two different views, and so when I met him, I was already under the restraint or the temporary injunction, which is pretty tight in Louisville. And so because I was in Louisville, it wasn't unusual for me to be in Mississippi at all. As a matter of fact, our second meeting, he had offered me a job over the phone while he was in Bermuda, and I was on the telephone at the shipyard. And then later I came back to cash in on the offer. I don't think whether he thought of me one way or another, or he was looking for some information. I think the Mississippi X Reel lawsuit had been in its infancy for a long time and hadn't really developed into anything that might be formidable in terms of its my dog. Its mission. So it needed something, and so I think that Dick Scruggs was speculating here that he would be getting something from me, and there was a lot of hanging up on the facts that had preceded him, and particularly the final blow in the Department of Justice, more like backing away from any active pursuit of Judge Wine's order from the bench. Can't talk to anybody. And of course, this is the prevailing doctrine. The Fourth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, to the detriment of the 14th Amendment, to the detriment of even Gideon v. Wainwright, and the concept of you can have a lawyer. And this was not a criminal case, or it could be, but it could be. So for years, there I am with ethical lawyers from ethical institutions, and I confront Dickie Scruggs, and a lawyer, and I am meeting for the first time in Pascagoula after a long hike in the woods in Kentucky, and in Washington as well, because there were a lot of things that we were doing through the litigation group. And the counterclaim, I had made that. Some newspaper articles, a lot of newspaper articles had been floating around. Dick Scruggs knew who I was. He was curious as to what I would contribute to him, I'm guessing. And that's a pretty good guess. But I walked into his office, and then I don't recall, but I think there was an introduction to Mr. Bozeman at the time, and I think the statement that I made was basically I can talk about tobacco in general in terms of what I know and what I can find in the public domain, but essentially I can't talk with my lawyers about anything but that kind of subject matter, and probably not get a challenge. And who knows, if you're not in the state of Kentucky, maybe you can talk about something else. On the other hand, I was not relieved to know that Dickie Scruggs had prepared for me. He had offered me a job, not in tobacco, but in, as it turned out, later in a different field, in a hearing loss field. And then during our conversation in the beginning, where I'm giving him some public information about tobacco and also some contacts, he dismisses Bozeman. And I think this is the way it went. Bozeman left, he sat at the desk, and then he pulls out an envelope. And he pulls out this envelope and puts it on the top of the table, and obviously it has cash in it. These are dollar bills, $100 bills. And, you know, for a man who's poor and who has no money whatsoever, coming from a man who's sitting behind a big desk with a sailboat in the background, and God knows, there he is. He's pulled out these $3,000 and he says, take it. And I said, okay, well, are we talking about front money for the beginning of my work here or at another law firm or maybe at a university? And he said, take it. He didn't explain it. And I think this was a way of being Dickie Scruggs, and in terms of the way he worked his talent, he was never, to me, and he described himself as such, it was never a guy who would walk into court. He was a guy who would love to talk about walking into court and how to strategize things. And so I was part of his strategy. And at the time, when someone puts $3,000 on the table, and they were in old bills. I mean, you got to think, oh, this has gone through the federal drug program before about 18 times, or somebody's laundering machine. But anyway, they were terribly old, but they were good bills. And so I'm looking. He hands it to me, passes it across the table, and I'm thinking, well, okay, if I'm looking at this from the perspective of where you are, and I took the envelope. Okay, we talked for a few more minutes, and then Dickie was always in a hurry. He was always in a hurry to get to Mike Moore, but he had an agenda here. So when I walked outside, and there he was. Bozeman was not too far in the background, or one of the lawyers, and Charlene Beausarge, his great secretary, who was paid a lot of money and had a Mercedes-Benz, was there listening to him. She had been dedicated to Dickie since she was about 16 years old. And Dickie comes out and he shakes my hand as he's going, and then he says, well, looking me right in the eye, and he's a few inches taller than I am, and he says, looking me straight in the eye, do you know anyone else that I can be bought? And in the context of what I was thinking at the time was, I've got witnesses here. I mean, I might have joked with him, but there are witnesses there, and he seems to be trying to pull a pattern of a very genuine effort to make a statement to me. And he's also making a statement to denigrate me, and to make a statement that is reckoning his own position, which is thickly endorsing bribery, or close to it. And he's asking me, do I know anybody else? Later he finds somebody else. And yet, on the same time, I don't believe in my own self that this is really in the context of bribery or earwigging or whatever. So I said, wait a minute, you're not going to get me on this. I am not going to come down here and be your bird on a wire. And there's no way in the world this is something, and I shortly put him down into his little perch, which was lower than a dime at the time, but I liked the money. It was the first time I ever had any money, and I assumed that it would be applicable to, guess what? The four payment for the first month. And since it was the beginning of the month, that was seemingly fine. So that was 2 visits, first time, and let's see.
So, when did you report to work, and what did you do for Scruggs at work?
The work was not exactly defined in April to the point that you knew what you were doing. I mainly talked with Bozeman, and Dickie Scruggs would come in and leave the conference room. And I was genuinely interested in helping these people out, and because they seemed rather naive, and they were. As I have remarked, they knew nothing about marketing. And this was a generic form of anybody's field. I knew marketing, I knew the corporate division, I knew law, corporate and law, I knew biologic research, I knew research, I knew research into children, I knew movie payola, I knew there was a whole slew of things, but the things that bothered me were not the things that everyone seemed to be pointing toward. And so I brought up a lot of issues that I thought were tail-end issues, and a lot of issues that I thought were important, particularly the lawyer involvement. And lawyer involvement, to me, was the most debasing part of anything, and it was to Fox as well, I would imagine. Although I wasn't standing before a dynamo of confidentiality here. Bozeman was merely taking notes, and Dickie came in from time to time in the conference room. So for weeks on time, or it seems to be so, we would meet, and I would meet at his office in the conference room. I would return back to Ocean Springs in the late afternoon, and every day at 12 o'clock, right on the dot, Scruggs and Bozeman would go off to a buffet in town at a local hotel. And so that was the pattern. And over the period of time, I got to know Bozeman a little bit more than Dickie, although I knew Dickie was playing the millionaire and the guy who was the money man. And Bozeman, I think, was more of the intellectual. He was writing a complaint. But the naivete and the lack of knowledge about tobacco, it didn't even faze Dickie, because I don't think he ever had an issue with whether or not he knew something about tobacco or the issues. He just needed to know a basic and then hand it on and delegate it to somebody else. But anyway, that's the way that looked. And so for the longest time, up until the time we took our plane trip to Orlando, the work that was cut out for me was essentially teaching. And later on, Mike Moore would acknowledge in an interview with me and with at that time, a health writer for USA Today, Doug Levy, how I had been, quote, the teacher. Well, I didn't particularly mind that, but on the other hand, there were things that had something more than the teacher in it. And if we were going to get along, I had to control. From the moment I met Dickie and the moment I actually saw in his eyes a little bit of the terror that I was not a bought person, this was something that he had to work on. And so he had to put his public relations to work, and that's what he did. And for that purpose,